Good morning. Good morning. We are in Covenant Lesson 3. We have been traveling through this conversation on the subject of covenant. This is a topical study. Topical studies in the inductive precept method are very intense looks. They're deep dives into a subject matter that helps us to lay a foundation of doctrines that you will be so blessed by and so surprised by, because when you learn these doctrines and when you become so familiar with the identifying markers of what covenant is all about, you're going to be able to traverse anywhere throughout the Old and New Testament, and you are going to see, covenant, covenant, covenant. It's everywhere. It is everywhere. Thus, we have Old Testament, New Testament, Old Covenant, New Covenant. That's the Word of God. It's all based on His covenant promises. So let's do a quick review, and I'm glad we have several new people, so this was really helpful for those who are new. And I think we have a new one you said online too. Who came in online this morning that was new? From
far. She was here last week.
Oh, was she? Leanne? Oh, that's right. Okay, I didn't know she was here last week. I guess I missed. Yes, Leanne had the prayer request, exactly. Okay, so let's do a quick review and make sure that we are, where's my marker? Here it is, behind me. Okay, week 1, what on the whole did you learn in week 1? What was the big picture of what we did in that homework? Somebody?
The overviews of all the different covenants.
Yeah, and we did an overview of all the different covenants. Why did we do that? What was our agenda? And why did we need to see what was similar? What was the agenda?
So we can identify.
There you go. So we could identify it. So we could define covenant. What you do is you define covenant by its identifying qualifiers or its identifying markers. Those things which make up what a covenant looks like is how you learn to identify it as far as a definition is concerned. The exciting thing is we did that last week. So in that week 1, so we're going to look at week 1. Very briefly, we defined it. Tell me what we defined it as. Now tell me those elements that you spoke of. What are some things that define by what because we went through like 8 or 10 different passages, and we looked here, we looked here. Some of them were covenants between God and man. Some were covenants between man and man. What were some of the customs or the traditions that make up covenant? Signs. You're going to the end. I like that. Signs. Signs. It is accompanied with all kinds of signs. Now, give me some examples of the signs. I'm sorry, say it again. A rainbow. Okay. What else? Yep, circumcision. The cool thing is you won't ever get confused again in the future about circumcision and what its function was. It was a sign. That's it. It was just a sign. Okay, so what does it not accomplish? Salvation. It's a sign of a covenant. Okay, what else? Pillars were set up. Name changes. Or giving of names. Right? So they would name a geographical location. They'd name a well. And God renamed Abram and Sarai to Abraham and Sarah. Meals. There was a meal. Now, to get to the meal, what must you first do? Cut what? By the killing of an animal, right? And then you would have to have a meal. And what did the meal generally contain? There were basically 2 primary elements in it. The animal you kill and a drink. Yep. Meal. I'm just going to put a food and a drink. Which is why then when you move into Levitical studies, if you do a Leviticus study, it talks about the meal offerings and the drink offerings. And also sometimes they have libations as well. Okay, what else?
Sometimes
Okay, they were gifts. Okay, and the gifts could even be under the sign, but we'll just put it down here. Okay, gifts. Can you explain some of the ideas of gifts? Like what kind of gifts?
Well, when the animals were given.
Yeah.
It's like
He gave certain measure. He set aside 7 ewe lambs and he gave them to Abimelech. Okay. Current history, what do we give for gifts? A wedding ring and a robe. There's also the robe also was another one, which we are going to look at intensely today, right? The robes, okay. Weapons and a belt and all that. So all those things are things that part of the covenant making. And so those are just nice. So the gifts or exchange of articles. Now this one's going to get greatly expounded on. Right now we're still in this particular covenant between David and Jonathan, and that's where our primary focus has been, but we're going to also see eventually we're going to come into other ideas where there's an exchange of things, where things are being exchanged with one another, and how that's a significant part of their taking on one another's identity. What about the basic definition? Let's look at the basic. We looked at that word covenant, and we looked at the word made as well, but we're just going to look at covenant for right now. Covenant, and it was number 1285 in the Old Testament. It was the word berith. And by definition, what is a berith?
solemn oath or vow, an agreement, a pledge.
A vow, agreement, pledge, confederacy, okay? League, alliance. I'm going to add on there also, which comes out of the New Testament, a will, right? We're going to add that one in there. Or it could be the other word in that New Testament one is testament. When I think of the will or the testament, though, it also makes me think of in the Old Covenant of the law, what did God give as a will or a testament or a contract? What was written on stone? The law. Yeah, the law was written, again, a will, a contract, a covenant, okay. So, and in the covenant making, when you look at the definition, it goes on to talk about in the sense of cutting. Because when you see it actually in Genesis 15:18, it says he made a covenant. That word made is the word cut. And so it's made by a sense of cutting. In the sense of cutting. And passing between the pieces of the flesh. And the result then, or the outcome of cutting an animal is what? And shedding of blood. Okay, so now concerning covenant, what did we see on the whole when you looked at all of these covenants? What seemed to be the factor that kept people accountable to one another? What was the pillar there for? What was that pillar supposed to do? To remember they had a covenant, and also to remind them what? There was a witness. Who was watching over that? It was God. May God watch between me and thee when we are absent one from another. That was the one between, I think it was Laban, right? And Jacob, yeah. Okay, so covenant, a vow, agreement, pledge, confederacy, alliance. It's in the sense of cutting flesh and passing between the pieces of that flesh, and therefore the shedding of blood. Okay, so that was week 1. And we did all that simply by allowing the scripture primarily to give us all those identifying marks so that we would look at them and sense that when we see these kinds of activities taking place, you read scripture and you go, are they making a covenant, or are they making a reference to the fact that they have a covenant? It's a possibility. And almost always in the Word of God, you can generally kind of default back to the idea, it probably is referring to a covenant in some fashion or form. When you see someone not act in a certain way or do act in a certain way, even if it's contrary to your understanding of what seems like is right in your thinking, you have to fall back or default back and say, okay, but if there has been a covenant that preceded the events that just took place, is that why God is acting in the way that he's acting? So that's just some pieces of things that are going to be helpful for you later. Now, week 2, then, we went on and we looked at Jonathan and David. Okay, and that's where we're going to be this week also in the rest of what we look at here. But just by way of review so that you have that information. Okay, so we have it defined. We have now this one here. This was in 1 Samuel 18, and basically 1 through 5 is what we covered last week. But what did Jonathan give to David? Gave to David his robe. What else? Belt. Armor. And sword. And sword and sword and sword. Okay, belt, armor, and sword. Is that close? And bow. There we go. I knew there was another one. Okay. Now, what details then followed that? This was really important to look at. And I think if you will open your 1 Samuel 18, just read verse 5 in particular. Let's pull out of there what we see following what happened. They made this covenant with one another. And then how did you see David acting or responding? What is the list of things? And so David did what?
He went where Saul sent him.
Okay, he went where Saul sent him. Now, what is the relationship of Saul to Jonathan? It's his dad. The interesting thing that I think that I have seen again this week is just a reminder that Saul is the king. So there's that, right? But more important in a covenant relationship, Saul is what? Jonathan's father. And because of that, this covenant that was made between Jonathan and David, there are going to be things that David is restrained on concerning how he behaves. Saul, on the other hand, doesn't seem to have any kind of restraint whatsoever, right? and I don't see that he's bound to either, because he did not enter into the covenant. His son Jonathan did. But David, on the other hand, he is bound to protect Jonathan and Jonathan's any family member that is involved with him. So David went wherever Saul sent him. What else do you see in there? He did, and he prospered. And he prospered.
And then Saul set him over the men of
Yes, he led the men of war for the nation, and for Saul, right? Saul sent him. And what was the response of the people in all this? This is a very interesting part of this. You can almost miss it, but it's really, I think it's going to pop out for us later here. They love him. The people love him. It was pleasing in the sight of the people.
David respected the anointing that was on Saul because he was appointed by God as the king. They kept killing David. You can kill him. I'm not going to touch God.
You are so right on that one. And I will come into that at another point here later on. I looked that up myself. But the one thing that I do think is important for us to remember, that is true. And that's why I brought up, who is Saul? He's the king. But who, more importantly in this context, who is Saul? He's the father of David's covenant partner. And in the flow of 18, 19, and 20, which is where we start on day 1 of our homework, what seems to be this emphasis of that? Is that about Saul being the king, or is that about Jonathan and David's relationship? It's about their relationship. So just keep that in mind. So you might want to even bracket off in your Bible somewhere. Just say 18 to 20 focuses Jonathan and David's covenant. And so everything that's being spoken of, everything that's being highlighted in those 3 chapters primarily focus upon that covenant relationship of these 2 men and what is proper or improper for a person to do who's in covenant with another. And so for our subject material, which is the subject of covenant, is to draw out as much as we can. It doesn't like make a direct statement, because I'm in covenant, I will do this. It doesn't say that, right? Instead, it just tells a storyline of how they behave with one another and how they interact. So you are analyzing it. In a way, it's an analytical list. You're analyzing what you're looking at and you're drawing out of it to say, what am I seeing here regarding how covenant is supposed to work? Now, why would this be important for us? Yeah, we are in covenant with God, yeah. And because we're in covenant with God, what else? Who else is in covenant with God? All of the people. And so if all of us are in covenant with the same God, then what does that do with our relationship with one another? Same thing. There's a covenant. We, in effect, by proxy, we become one body, right? And we see this when we move into those New Testament things this week. And because we are one body and we're all in covenant with Jesus, then what does that make you and I? Covenant partners. And we have the same responsibilities that we are observing here between Jonathan and David, we have toward one another as the body of Christ. It's a wedding. Exactly. Okay, so David gave his robe, his belt, his armor. So what we focused on when we looked at this part of the homework last week was the idea of the robe, rather, that he gave David his robe. And we just honed in on what is that robe all about. So when we did that, we saw concerning the robe, putting on the robe, what was that about? What did that do? This is just to review, so we catch everything here and make sure we...
Basically putting on the identity of Jonathan, so he acted authority.
Okay, so it's...
on the robe of the prince.
Yeah. Putting on the identity of covenant partner. Now watch if I can get up. I'm down here, but can I get up? Okay. I need to do more exercises. Okay. All right, so can you think of some of the New Testament verses, even if you don't have them crystallized totally in your head? What did we learn in Galatians and in Colossians and Romans last week, Ephesians even?
We're clothing ourselves.
Yeah. So in the New Testament, we are clothed with Christ. Okay? That's in Galatians 3:27. All right, what else? What did he tell us to take off and put on? So we are called to take off the old self and to put on the new self, who is being renewed in the image of Christ, right? Image of Christ who created us. Colossians 3. Okay. When it comes to the new covenant, we have a ritual or a symbolic picture of entering into our covenant also, right? What symbolic picture? Baptism. So in that symbolism, then, what do we do when we are put under the water? We die to self, and when you are brought up out of the water, you rise to walk in newness of life. So in Romans 6:6, it says that we have been baptized into his death. We are united with him in the likeness of his death, and we are no longer slaves to sin. Because we have died to self and to the sin nature, we are now to walk in this newness of life. So we die to self. Would you say that in dying to self, we're seeing some of that here? Die to self and live to covenant partner. And I'm going to give Romans 6 on that one, I think, 6:6. And it's kind of in that whole area. You can go in and look at all of it if you wanted to review any of that. So the last thing I want to remind you of in that then is in Colossians 3:15. It says, we are called into one body. We are called into one body. I'm going to put in parentheses, the church. Right? And in that one body, we're called into the likeness of God. That's in Ephesians 4:24. Oh, okay. Pardon?
You made it.
I did. I'm going to get my exercise this morning. Okay, so now before I go into this week's homework, I went through the entire curriculum. You know, it's been 7 or 8 years since I taught this last, so even though I know covenant pretty well, I had kind of forgotten what the flow here is. And so I want to give you guys the same heads up I now have for myself. What we have done is we have identified what it is by the text. We also went in and did our word studies, got a good definition of it. Now what we are doing is we are looking at the covenant customs in depth for the purpose of just drawing out as much meat and as many principles of it and trying to find application for us in this new covenant that we're in with Christ. So starting in week 2, we put on his robe. That was the first deep dive. We looked at the robe. Today we're looking at the giving of these weapons. Next week we're going to do the blood sacrifice. Then we're going to do a walk into death. And then we're going to do a really big lesson, which, by the way, this is lesson 6. We are going to probably need to subdivide that down into 2 lessons because it's very lengthy. But it's only going to be lengthy if you initiate within yourselves a desire to really dig out some of these things. You're going to need to do some research, study, maybe read some books. There's a variety of books. I'll give you guys a list of books and I'll send them to Kristen, suggestions. But if you go through the curriculum and read, Kay is going to be quoting a variety of people as she goes through. There's different writers have really good insights from doing missions work around the world and how you see the subject of covenant out in the world that is non-biblical, and yet you know behind it there was a foundation piece that where it started that seems to have a common ancestry. Well, what do you think the common ancestry of covenant is? God. Who started covenant? God. Where did he first cut covenant? Well, I think it's in Genesis 3 when he killed the animal to clothe Adam and Eve. He told them, don't do this. They did that. They broke covenant. God said, I'm going to bring a seed and he's going to crush the head of Satan on your behalf. And in doing that, then he clothed them. So you see all the elements that we've looked at the last couple of weeks on covenant cutting. Well, in customs then that went around the world, when God destroyed the world by a flood, which we also looked at in our week 1 homework, when they came off that ark, they took with them the concept and the knowledge and the truth about what covenant is. And with them, their personal experiences of customs and traditions that are associated with covenant making. And it's really interesting to me how often the kind of covenant that's being made will determine the kind of symbolic gesture that they will give for it. Like, for instance, remember when was it Abraham? It was Isaac that kept digging wells, and he finally got a well that he gets to keep, and what does he do? He plants a tree there. And he names the well and names that general area. Why? Because that makes sense with the covenant that he was making. We get to have this well. This well belongs to us, and he plants a tree for longevity to recall that there was a covenant made of agreement that this well belonged to him. Now, once we get beyond that week 6, we do week 7, and we do one more deep dive, and that's on how covenant is going to be extended to descendants. And that's a really fun lesson. And it's a shorter one, so we'll do that all in 1 week. Then the last, 1, 2, 3, 4, the last 4 weeks of our study are going to be moving into the New Testament, and we're going to do contrasting and comparing of the 3 significant covenants, which is the Abrahamic, the law, and the new covenant in Christ. And so we'll get to look thoroughly at those and see how they really relate to one another. And for many people, this is such an eye-opening study because it really affirms for yourself the idea that the covenant of the law was never intended for your salvation. It had a totally different design purpose in it. But you don't know that when you don't know the Word of God real thoroughly. And also, it's the reason why so many people, even young believers, will fall back into the I have to do this and I have to do that. And some people who even want to continue to keep the law. So studying that in these last 4 weeks of our study time is going to really develop a thorough knowledge on your part as best as you can, however much you can possibly retain, you want to, because it's going to be really helpful in conversations that you have with people who are struggling with the idea of assurance of salvation and what our responsibility is towards feasts and holidays of the Jews and how Judaism affects us but doesn't affect us. And you can really define that for them clearly when we get done with this. So that's where we're going. We'll have several weeks of deep dives. This week, the last week was a deep dive on the robe. This week is going to be a deep dive on these weapons and the belts. Then we move on from there. So that's kind of the plan. Does that make sense to you now? So that's why on week 1, we kind of touched on all of these things, but now we're going back into the same verses that we just came out of and we're hitting them again. Well, because we're looking for different things, different points. So this week we're looking on the subject of the armor and the belt. Okay, now, everyone good? Was that helpful? I hope. That kind of gives you, I don't know about you guys, but I like to know the end of the story. That's why I love God's Word. I know we win, huh? Yeah. I want to know the end of the movie, or I can't follow it. I'm like, who's winning? Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I need to know. So for me, knowing where we're going in our plan of homework, it helps me so much to focus. I go, okay, now I know the plan. I can relax in it, and I don't struggle with, well, why are we doing this, and why are we doing that again? Now you know what the agenda is, where we're heading. Okay, so let's start now with this week. We did on day 1. We have quite a bit of information here on day 1 to go through. We did those 3 passages that I just told you are about Jonathan and David's covenant and how everything that's listed in those chapters is going to accentuate an understanding of what covenant is between these 2 men and how that is going to then reflect upon us. So 1 Samuel 18, 1-5, we began with our understanding that Jonathan gave him these articles of clothing. Then what did Kay do with us in day 1 of homework? Let me follow over here. She talks about Livingstone. That was interesting. The missionary explorer. He relates many incidents of entering into blood covenant with a number of African chiefs in his book called The Congo. There's one book that you might want to be interested in purchasing and reading. If you're a reader, that would be fun to read, I think, although I've never read it. And she said, I had become united forever with my 50th brother, is what this man says in his book, to whom I was under the obligation of defending him against all foes until death. Isn't that interesting? In the Congo, a group of people who do not yet know God in this context of this writing, and yet they seem to have a concept that in a covenant relationship, you are responsible for the welfare and the longevity of life for the person that you're in covenant with. Now, so she goes on and says, okay, now read the following verses then with that as your backdrop, which show David and Jonathan's situation, and then write how his responsibility of covenant is illustrated in their relationship. So let's do that. 1 Samuel. And it's 18, and was 6-16, I think, were the verses she gave us, correct? Okay. Really only need to put a couple of points down here, but let's just talk about what you saw in there. Tell me what you saw was going on in their relationship, and how does it fit to our subject of covenant? What happened? Yeah, it does seem like interesting that, in particular, Saul. Yeah, Saul, yeah. In particular, no, the community was really praising him, which is what made, you're right, but that's what made Saul jealous, right? Okay. And why was he jealous?
They liked David more than him.
Why? Yeah, David was having success. And who was paying attention? The people. And the people, when David returned from killing the Philistine, the women came out of the cities of Israel singing and dancing to meet King Saul with tambourines and with joy and musical instruments. The women sang as they played, and I can just see this, it's a picture in my brain. They said, Saul has slain his thousands and David his tens of thousands. And Saul became angry. So you're like, why would Saul, wouldn't it be a good thing? Well, think about politics today. When a politician does something good, other politicians tend to get angry. Isn't that crazy? Even if it's good for your country, they don't want to share that glory, right?
Well, don't we also have to remember Saul's already been struck by God?
Yes, he has. And David has been anointed. And we covered that last couple of weeks. But yes, David has already been anointed by Samuel to be the next king. I'm not certain how much of that Saul understood, or if Saul understood it was David directly, because he's bringing him into his castle. I don't think he would do that if he had understood it. Jonathan seems to understand this, however. And by God's divine orchestration of events, David has come into the palace of Saul in order to play musical instruments to calm him because of this evil spirit that God had allowed to come upon him. So Saul, now David is present. David has been sent out. He's killed his tens of thousands, according to the singers. Saul has become very angry, is displeased for this. Because they had ascribed this to David, and he's not happy with that. Now, what more can he have but the kingdom? So he's already going, golly, it looks to me like this guy's going to be the next king, although he's technically not in line for it, right? Okay, so what else do we see?
He actively tries to kill him, like
Right.
throwing the spear at him,
Pin him
into the wall.
That is shocking. So Saul is trying to pin David to the wall, although David has done nothing but what? Played the harp and gone out to war. He went out to war, fought battles on behalf of, and won. He prospered, right? And yet Saul's response to him is not thank you, but I hate you and I'm going to kill you. Yes, it did say that. Now, why do you think why does it say that he was afraid of him?
Because the Lord was with him.
Yes. Do you remember when we looked at the other covenants before, where Abimelech wanted to make covenant with Abram, and he wanted to make covenant with Isaac? And he said it's because why? He saw that God was with them. Both the father and the son of King Abimelech looked and said, I see that God is with him. Let's make a covenant. I mean, that was the premise of the structure of the sentence. God is with you. I want to make a covenant with you. So this is what Saul is recognizing, is that God is no longer with him. He certainly seems to be with David. David is prospering, and the people are recognizing it, and Saul is not happy with this. So what does Saul do? He hurls the spear at him. This is the first encounter of this spear throwing episodes, which he goes through a lot of these, right? And he said, I will pin David to the wall. But do you see the word but? Circle it and highlight it. That's an important word right there, especially in the structure of this sentence. But what did David do? He escaped. Now, that seems a rather benign statement. He escaped. Well, of course he would try to escape, right? But honestly, he's a man of war. You know who the Philistines are, right? They were the giants in the land in that day. These are massively huge people. And Goliath, he killed Goliath and brought his head to King Saul. That's how all this relationship between him and Saul started. So this is David, who's having an old man king throw a spear at him, and his response is to flee. Why? Why?
Because Saul was the anointed. Well, because
No.
Covenant with Jonathan.
Yes, because in this context, yes, see, that's what I kept defaulting back to because he's the anointed king. No, this is all about covenant between Jonathan and David is what is doing what? Honoring his covenant responsibility to Jonathan. Pretty important, significant thing. He flees. He doesn't flee because he's a coward. Any real scenario, what would a man like David have done if a man threw a spear at him? He would have turned around and killed him and been successful. David is younger and stronger, and he's already proven himself in battle. And we know God is with him. Yes.
And it just kind of reminds me of when Jesus got away, too.
Yes.
That was kind of, it's always been interesting, why is Jesus trying to get away, but this is not his time, but kind of just because he's human.
Yes. Yes. It just blew. For me, the subtleties that are in the scripture are the things that we miss. If we are not doing it inductively, this is what we miss, are these really cool gems. These are gems, you guys. It's not a minor thing that he said and he escaped. I mean, he shouldn't have escaped. He should have turned around, taken that spear out of his hand and shoved it in his face, right? Or he should have killed him. He should have responded by killing him in response. But he doesn't do that. And so our question is the why behind that. So what do we see then going on here? We saw David was successful. In battle. And praised by the people. And you can't help but think that Saul saw this too. He certainly know that. And what does Saul do? He raved at him. And that's and by the way, he also going in verse 11, I think it is. What does it say? But David did what? Escaped
From his presence twice.
twice, not once, twice. It's kind of like God, he must have escaped a little bit of an escape, not a full escape. And then Saul probably turned around and came after him again, and he escaped again. So David had two opportunities. In the mind of any normal thinking person, he would be justified for self-defense and to have killed Saul. But he didn't. He did it twice. I hope you noticed that word twice in there. Saul raved, and what do we see? David escaped Saul's assault. Twice. That's just blows my mind. So the conclusion of that then is about David. What do we see here regarding covenant?
Honoring it.
Yeah. He does not lift his hand against Saul because Saul is Jonathan's father. Pretty cool.
Did you say David was protected? That God protected David because he obeyed the covenant?
Oh, I would certainly say that. Number one, also, the other reason was what we read previous, and that is who had already anointed him to be the next king? Samuel. At whose behest? God. God sent Samuel, anoint him. I shall choose the one who should be the next king. So God has already got it in the plan. The orchestration of God's unfolding decree is this will be the next king over Israel. So you bet God's protecting him. That's it's a secondary subject matter, but yes, it's definitely seen there. So David does not lift his hand against Jonathan's father. Do you see how I worded that? I didn't say against the king or against Saul, but against Jonathan's father. That's because he just simply escaped. So, was that 11? I think it was. Yeah. Okay. Okay, now, so conclusion statement. You can make yourself a bullet point somewhere. What does covenant require then? Just from what we saw here, what does covenant require?
Action on both sides. Participants together?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, between Jonathan and David, they have a covenant together.
Sure, but we're not talking about David here. We're not talking about Jonathan at all. We're only talking about David. So on David's part, what do we see? What did David not do? He didn't kill his dad. So what is the covenant principle that we're seeing in this point? What is the covenant responsibility? To protect your covenant partners. Yes. Say it again.
Don't kill your in-laws.
Yeah, there you. Oh, that's good. No killing in-laws, especially mother-in-laws. Big no-no. Covenant requires we protect and do no harm to all that belongs to our covenant partner. Pretty good point, huh? Covenant requires that we protect and do no harm to all the... Now see, if you and I were just reading this at home in a casual manner and not doing this inductively for a purpose, we would have just saw this interesting storyline of the dynamics between these people. But what God is showing us is a principle about covenant. Covenant requires that we protect our covenant partner. Everything that belongs to him, we are to do no harm to our covenant partner. And in the case of his father, this would do Jonathan harm. So David does no harm. Okay? All right, so that was the very first one you looked at. Now we go to 1 Samuel 19, 1 to 11. This unfolding saga, and we're missing a lot of pieces of information as we go through this. There's some places where it's a huge amount left out. What do we see in 1 Samuel 19, 1 to 11?
Well, Saul's trying to kill him, so David goes to Jonathan. He's like, what's going on? What'd I do?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so David is rightly confused by the response of the king toward him, who has been doing such good things, praying for his nation and going out to war and having successes in battle. David apparently does not perceive the idea of jealousy in this. He can't understand why there should be jealousy if, in fact, he is in relationship with the king himself, and it's the king who sent him. So he's like, wait a minute, you hired me, you sent me out, I prospered and did what you sent me to do. This gives you glory as a king, your nation, you chose wisely, king. I mean, David is like, I'm confused, right? I don't understand. So Jonathan told David saying, Saul, my father, is seeking to put you to death. Now, therefore, please be on your guard. Now, how does Jonathan know that? Well, verse 1 tells us what happened. In verse 1 of 19. Yeah, interesting. So at this point, Saul probably does not understand that they're in a covenant yet, right? It's going to become a reality for him very quickly, though, because this scenario then is going to follow with Jonathan covertly doing things behind Jonathan's back, where Jonathan won't know what's going on. But at this point, Saul thinks Jonathan or he are simpatico on idea and thought, as father and son, about how to rule over their kingdom, and he thinks it's what's good for me is good for Jonathan, and so Jonathan will be with me on this. So he tells Jonathan to put David to death. But Jonathan, Saul's son, greatly delighted in David. So we have already seen that. Previously, he said he made a covenant with him because he loved him as himself. There was this bond in their heart. All right, what else is going on there? What's the response?
Jonathan does his part and warns David.
Yeah, so Saul, he tells Jonathan and others to kill David. And Jonathan does what?
Intercedes.
Yeah, he warns David. So instead of going out and doing what his dad says, he goes on the defense of his covenant partner, doesn't he? He says, no, I'm not going to do that. What else do we see happening here? There you go. There's a mediation then that goes on. Now Jonathan mediates. On behalf of David. What was the things that he was telling his dad?
Basically, why are you mad at him because he's done all this for you?
Yeah. He's like, come on, Dad, you do know that David did these things, right? And he said, why are you wanting to kill the one who's done such great things on your behalf? Do not let the king sin against his servant, David. That's pretty amazing. So Jonathan is mediating on behalf of David, and what is the outcome? I almost want to put it here temporarily, but it doesn't say that, but it's only temporary. But until later, until his dad goes off the deep end again. So in 1904 and 1907, we see that it says, in 1904, it says, then Jonathan spoke well of David to Saul his father. And then the last one is in verse 7, he said, and Jonathan called David and Jonathan and told him all these words. And Jonathan then brought David to Saul. So there's a reconciliation that happens because of this, right? He mediates on behalf, he persuades his father, and yeah.
Technically never killed him, so he didn't actually, he tried, but he didn't.
Okay, so I'm going to add in a parentheses, temporarily. Yeah, it's a temporary thing. So again, now let's do, what is covenant teaching us in here? What are the things that we're seeing here? There's only a couple of points, but what do you see going on then? What does covenant require? Who is the conflict between? Dad and his covenant partner. And Jonathan's response to this is, it's not to be for his dad, but it's to be for who? His covenant partner. So what is what supersedes what?
The loyalty supersedes his dad.
Yes. Loyalty to your covenant partner supersedes all other relationships, even family.
You made an oath before God.
Yeah. Wow. I think that for me, when I was young in my faith walk and was first married in particular, the idea that you need to side with your covenant partner in marriage. Now, this is assuming your covenant partner is not asking you to do something bad or that he is not having evil intent. So just disregard all the what ifs. But if you've got a good covenant partner and there's a tiff between your husband and anyone else, family or otherwise, your responsibility is to stand beside the one you're in covenant with. That relationship supersedes all other relationships. That's amazing, huh?
Because later Jonathan actually does an act of treason before his covenant partner.
Yes. And that's what we're learning is we're observing the text from the perspective of what are we seeing here concerning just the subject of covenant. Even family has to come second. Boy, wouldn't this be a great pre-marriage This would be and not only that, but it would also be a warning. You be careful who you marry, because you are bound before God, who is the witness of all covenant, that you are saying, I am going to yoke myself to this man. Two shall become one, or this woman, if you're a guy. Two shall become one, and your responsibility to your covenant partner supersedes all other relationships. You must put them up. I got one young girl in the room, right? You're hearing this? Getting your marriage figured out? I'm going to pick on Jordan in the back because she's a young girl, not married yet. Oh, no, don't point me out. I'm hiding in the corner. Yeah, but do you think this is great insight for future? I mean, when you think about who you might marry, you have to understand that when you yoke to we're all married or beyond married years. I'm not sure of all of you, but those of us who have been married, I mean, it's a done deal for us. But when you're training up young women, if you are giving advice to, your grandchildren and other young people in your life, you need to make sure that they understand these covenant principles. Had I known all this, when I was young, and I could have taught it better to my children, I'm so sorry that I didn't. I wish I had known these things better. Not that it didn't turn out badly. It's all good, but still. Loyalty to covenant supersedes all other relationships, even family. And P.S. and by the way, these notes are all on my chart, and my chart is sent out every week to you from Kristen, and you can go and print that out and put it into your workbook if you have a printer to enable to do that. It doesn't quite come out. I've noticed that when they come and you print them, they do a jig-jag, so they're not all quite in the order as mine are, but it doesn't matter. You'll get every point and every cross-reference that is listed. And even if I say it wrong, I think last week I told people in your how-to study book to go in and read, what chapter was it? One of the chapters, and I gave the wrong chapter number.
Each book is a different chapter.
Oh.
Noticing that 𝐂𝐸's was a 15, this one's a 14.
Oh, well, that's where I made a mistake. Oh, it wasn't me. I'm so glad. See, I was right again. I thought I was wrong, but I was right again. Just kidding. Thank you, though, thank you for rescuing me, covenant partner. She defended me well. You see, that's a great example. Okay. All right. So that was the first. Okay. First point: loyalty to covenant partners supersedes all other relationships. Now, another point to this that's a little bit subliminal, and this is not totally highlighted, but when it comes to Jonathan and David's relationship, and who Jonathan actually is the king's son. What is his inheritance supposed to be? The crown, the kingdom. So what does this teach you then about, think of what Jonathan is doing here on behalf of David.
He's putting David above his king.
Yes. And by the way, if he wanted to get rid of David back when Dad said go kill him, it was a prime opportunity for Jonathan to say, I have to obey my dad. But see, in covenant, you can't do that, right? And so Jonathan, number one, he remembers his superseding covenant partner, number one. Secondarily, what else does he do concerning his covenant responsibility? What's his obligation to?
Protect him.
To protect him, and regardless of what? For himself personally.
Whatever consequences there are for this.
Yeah. Okay, let me just tell you how I put this out here. Covenant obligations supersede even your own personal interests. Yeah, ouch. Oh, wait a minute, but I really wanted this. Yeah, but it's yeah, can we just not put that one on the board, right? So covenant obligation supersedes even your own personal interests. Now, it doesn't indicate in any way, shape, or form that Jonathan wants to do anything to harm David. But the fact that he doesn't, and the fact that he doesn't take opportunity to recapture his rightful place to the throne by killing David, the fact that he goes and has this mediation between his father and David to try to reconcile them and bring peace, he does all of this at great consequential losses to himself personally. He understands he's not going to have that throne. But what has he already in his heart done? Because he loves David as himself. He's bowed his knee to God in this. God is the one who, through the prophet Samuel, anointed David to be the next king. Jonathan has already bowed his knee in this. This is quite a testimony on behalf of who Jonathan is as a young man.
And it's kind of neat to think of he knew this
Yes.
in his own heart. He knew that God did this.
Yes, he did. He knew it. He honored it. He bowed his knee to it. He acted on behalf of it. He supported it. He went over and beyond by going against his dad's wishes on things. He went over and beyond by interceding and mediating between the two. And he did it knowing his own personal losses in it. How many of us live up to our covenants in that way? I mean, if that doesn't bring personal conviction, I know it does for me. I mean, and I've been married 51 years. I have a lot of years of marriage, but I can tell you I haven't always done it perfectly, right? Well, maybe practically perfect, but not always. Thank you. Maybe. But the idea that all those things that we just listed are the requirement of covenant, that's what we're learning here in this passage, that is really quite, I think, convicting. Okay, then we went to 1 Samuel 20. Verses 1 to 13.
Just a little side note that in verse 11, David's wife warned him
Yes.
too, which is
Yes.
was doing her covenant.
Right, and that's a different but yes, you're absolutely right, and
Over her father.
yes, and it's amazing to me that we didn't really focus on that one at all, because it doesn't become a prominent piece. It's like it's between Jonathan and David. Oh, and P.S. by the way, the wife too. The wife was also the daughter of Saul. Poor Saul. Both his kids are in covenant with David. He hasn't got a chance. Yeah, that was a good point. Okay, and we didn't do it, but I'm just going to read this out to you so that you catch the flow of thought here, you guys, because this is really interesting. Verse 10, Saul was trying to pin David to the wall with the spear, but David escapes in verse 10. Now it says, Saul sent messengers to kill David at Ramah, because David had escaped to Ramah where Samuel lived. That's in 19:18. Then Saul 3 times sent messengers, different men, to Ramah to kill David. But the Lord's Spirit came upon each of them, and they prophesied along Samuel instead. Kind of makes you think of Balaam, right? The guy that wanted to curse God, curse Israel, but God wouldn't let him. Every time he went to open his mouth to curse, out came blessing. Well, that's what happened here. Saul sent them to kill David, 3 different men, 3 different assaults against him at Ramah. So it wasn't like David was in his face and he wanted to kill him. David had left and went to Ramah where Samuel was for protection. And Saul sent 3 different fleets of men to come and kill him, and instead they ended up prophesying. There's God's protection for David right there. And then in 23 and 24 of 19, which we also did not read, Saul himself goes to Ramah to kill David. But you know what happens with Saul when he gets there? He prophesies too. Isn't that hysterical? That is the funniest story if you think of. Poor Saul, he has got to be going, what is going on here? This is hysterical. Okay, so now back to serious note. 1 Samuel 20, 1 to 13. What do we see in this part of the story?
Now David is going to Jonathan.
Yeah. So right. And this is why I wanted to give you all these stories, the backstory of all these assaults, and Saul sending men to kill him, and Saul himself going to kill him. And finally, David says, man, I'm not safe in Ramah. I might as well go back to where Jonathan is. He's my covenant partner. So he returns back to his friend David at the castle. And David then, he says he fled from Ramah. He came to Jonathan and said, what have I done? What is my iniquity and what is my sin before your father that he is trying to seek my life? And Jonathan said, far be it from you that you shall not die. Behold, my father does not do anything, neither great nor small, without disclosing it to me. Jonathan is clueless that this has been going on. So what has happened before was Saul said to Jonathan, go kill him. Now we're in chapter 20. Saul is not telling Jonathan. He's covertly sending people to kill him, and then himself he sneaks away to go kill him. He doesn't tell Jonathan anything. So now Jonathan is like, what? My dad's not trying to kill you. You know, if you were just reading the storyline, you miss the fact that Jonathan is clueless in this. So he didn't know this was going on. So what is the unfolding story then after that? What is Jonathan's response to David as David is pleading before him, saying, yes, your dad's trying to kill me?
Basically, he just takes it on faith and says, all right, what do you want me to do for you?
There you go. That's a really good way of putting it on faith. He's basically believing that David's complaint is true. Kind of makes me think of the covenant complaints that Abraham and also Isaac had about the well digging, and he kept saying, your people keep doing this, and they're going, no, my people, this is the first time I've heard of this, Abimelech said, but Abimelech didn't know about it. His herdsmen were out there trying to sabotage these other men. Well, the same thing is going on here. Jonathan was unaware, which is really interesting. So Jonathan
is going, just believing his dad. His dad said, as the Lord lives, I live.
I know that. Yes.
So that's what he's.
That's right. And the fact that obviously now Saul is withholding information from Jonathan, which is what sets up this chapter 20 for us. And you only get that information by going through and reading all of chapter 19, which we didn't do. We only went through 11. But chapter 19 goes all the way to 24. So there's pieces of information we missed. All right. So Jonathan comes to David. Or David comes to Jonathan and tells Jonathan, your dad's trying to kill me again. Jonathan is like, what? That can't be true. And David said, yes, it is. And so then he says, okay, what? What in verse 4?
Whatever you say, I will do for you.
Yeah. So David goes to Jonathan with complaint. And Jonathan does what?
Tell me what to do.
I will do whatever you want. I will do what you ask. Okay, that's pretty cool. That's in verse 4 of 20. What else? What happens next? Starting in 7 down.
So then they have a little, David sets up the test for Saul.
Mm-hmm.
What he can do so that he can covertly find out whether it was good or bad. Is Saul trying to kill me, or am I free to come back?
Yeah. And actually, it almost looks to me like Jonathan is the one setting it up. Jonathan brought David to Saul, and he was in his presence as formerly. Oh, wait a second. Wrong one. I'm sorry. Jonathan said, okay, well, hold on. You're right.
5, David's like, hey, there's this new moon. I should be eating with the king. However,
Yeah, so that's where David set it up. That's what I was remembering.
6 to 7 is kind
Yeah.
of like a test.
Yeah, David says, let's set up this test, and then you watch your dad, and if you see these responses, then we'll know, and then you'll know what I know. And so in that, also along the way, we have this interesting piece of information in verse 8. What is the statement here? Therefore, deal kindly with your servant. Again, there's that loving kindness terminology that's coming in. Deal kindly with your servant, for you have brought your servant into a covenant, what? Of the Lord. So what is he saying here?
Just remember, we have a covenant with God watching.
That's right, God's watching. And we have a covenant before the Lord, you before the Lord, me before the Lord. And so God's watching this. So you need to deal kindly. Loving kindness of covenant needs to be extended toward me. And so what we see then is Jonathan must and will protect David's life here, right? In verse 8. Because he's calling him account to it. Jonathan, I'm going to put before the Lord. Because that's the trigger word that he sort of brought out. Before the Lord, you must protect David. And that's in verse 8. So he's really calling on that piece of covenant information that says, you have an obligation to protect my life. And he actually in 8 and 9, David recalls his vows and as an assurance for his safety. Are you catching that? I'm going to remind you that we're in covenant so that there's an assurance of my safety because it's going to be fresh in your mind. You and I have this covenant vow.
And then in 9, Jonathan reaffirms it and says, right, Like,
Yeah.
why would I not tell you?
Yes. And Jonathan said to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. So again, it's all about the witness of God in this, that God's watching over. How much of that is lost in our culture today?
Oh, jeez, it's gone.
Because we have so many people that just, we enter so lightly into covenant, in particular with marriage, but all kinds of covenants, even business relationships, if they are really, if you're really entwined with them with your finances and it's going to affect your family. Anybody who's been in a bad situation like that, you know how scary this is. But if that person that you're going, you know who really deals with this are lawyers and medical people. They go into covenants with one another to have businesses, and other people too, but I'm thinking of those two in particular. And they can bankrupt one another if one of them doesn't do right by their covenant partner, right? So Jonathan says to David, the Lord, the God of Israel, be witness. And he says in verse 13, if it please my father to do you harm, what? Yeah, may the Lord do so. May the Lord do so to Jonathan and more. Also, if I do not make it known to you. Now, what does that make you think about when you think about the idea of the definition of covenant making? What does it say here? The covenant is the idea of cutting an animal in half and then passing between the pieces of flesh, the blood. And as they're walking, they would walk a figure eight in that blood. And as they did, they would recount their vows to one another. And as they get to the other side, they turn and face one another again. Now, the blood of that animal is upon the hem of the garment and upon their feet. And this is to remind them of exactly what's being said here. May the Lord do so to Jonathan, and more also, if I do not make it known to you. May God do what then? Take my life. If my father is trying to kill you and I don't warn you, then may God take my life because I didn't protect you. Wow. Okay, so that you may go in safety, and may the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. That's a cute little add-on at the end that I think needs to have a whole separate verse, actually, because it's a really strong point here. What is he saying? May the Lord be with you as he has been with my father. Who is his father in this context? The king. May God be with you, David, when you become king, as God has been with my father who is king. That's like, it's your kingdom. I'm here. I'm your covenant partner, and I understand you are going to be the next king. And he's giving his blessing upon David in that capacity. May God be with you as he has been with my father.
Which is interesting because back in 7 and 8, David he calls himself your servant 3 times.
Yes.
Giving deference to Jonathan.
Yes.
In his position.
Yes.
Even though he knows he's the
Right. In the temporary moment, he is in a different position. He is subordinate to Jonathan. This is why Jonathan gave him his robe and his articles of war, because Jonathan has the upper hand in this human relationship here. But the real upper hand is that God is with David. And so Jonathan is recognizing that also. This is, what a neat storyline. So what are the weapons here then? What's being pictured here on these weapons then? Let's look at what covenant is saying to us here. Well, I'm just going to do one. Loyalty to protect is required. The second one is your life and strength is devoted to your partner. Your life can be required if you break it. It won't always be, but it can be. It can be. And then, who is the witness? God is the witness over covenant. I'm going to put plural on there because he's over all of them. Okay, so those are the things that we've learned so far about covenant. It requires that we protect and do no harm. All that belongs to our covenant partner must be protected. Loyalty to covenant partner supersedes all other relationships. Our covenant obligation supersedes even our own personal interests. We have a responsibility to, with the idea of these weapons, to protect the other person. Our life and strength is to be devoted to them. Our life can be required if we break it. It doesn't mean God always does do that. But do you think that there are times when God can take a life, even today, if covenants are broken? He certainly can. Now, we don't always see it or understand that that's what's going on, but some people, if you're really in tune with what's going on, I remember years and years ago, a friend of mine said to me, her daughter's life was lost. She said God took her because she was being disobedient. She was in covenant with God, and she was living in all these ways. She could not master her addictions and her problems, and God took her out. She said, I think he did it to protect his holy name and to also leave her with less guilt, allowing her to stay and linger in what she was going. And I thought that was quite insightful. And it blew me away when I first heard her say that. I really rejected it because I thought that's just a horrible thing to say. It's her own daughter. But in the end, I thought, that's a possibility. And I think about Moses. When Moses was not obeying God, do you remember with Sapphira? I think we're going to get into Sephora. They were on their way back to Egypt to set the people free, and they had not yet circumcised their own child, their own male child. And God put Moses on a deathbed because he wasn't keeping covenant. And he was about to die. And what did Sephora do? She circumcised the baby. She threw the foreskin at the feet of her husband and said, "You are a blood covenant to me. You're a covenant of blood to me." She recognized that her husband was about to lose his life because he was not keeping covenant with God. So there's an Old Testament. In the New Testament, do you know of an account that's similar? When the church was first being established, Ananias and Sapphira, they lied to the Holy Spirit. They were bringing a bad reputation on the identity of God's new thing called the church, and God took both of them. It doesn't mean they weren't saved. It means God took them out because of their disobedience to covenant. So, and at a crucial time, right? Now, we don't know how God works that out in the lives of others, but I'm just saying, this is showing us he can.
I don't know if this is a similar situation, but it kind of reminds me of what God said about the husband to the wife, that he would, when he would take care of his wife to his death, like Christ did the church.
Yes. You're talking about Ephesians 5 and 6, right? 5 particularly, about the husband and wife. Yeah. Yeah, I just think there's probably a lot of them in there that we just kind of overlook. But knowing that in covenant with God, you have a responsibility, knowing that, now God doesn't do it often, especially in the covenant of grace. Thankfully, he doesn't do that, because I would have been long gone, right, for messing up in so many ways. But God has the right, and the principle that we're learning today is he does have the right. And he is the one watching. And I think for us to understand that, what does that do for us? What does that do for you personally? To know that God could take your life if you're not honoring your covenant with him. Don't you think it's sobering? Don't you think it makes you rise up a little bit better to the occasion? Paul talks so often about, I don't do the things I should, and I should do all those, this back and forth of the flesh. And the man without the Spirit of God can't do anything. That's really what Romans was talking about. But regardless, even with the Spirit of God, look at David's life. David also failed God often. He could have taken David's life, but he chose not to. God had a higher purpose in the life of David, so instead he simply shamed him and took from him that child as a consequence. And it's sad, but God can do that, and that's what covenant is all about. So we've learned that when you look at the idea of all the weapons, putting on that belt and the bow, the sword, the armor, we're seeing here these weapons. This is what it's depicting for us here. So now let's go to the New Testament. Okay, I think I'm going to be okay. Okay, I always say that, right? Okay, so let's go into the New Testament. Then actually, we're going to start first in the Old, in day 2. So let's do day 2. And we did Psalm 105. And it was verses 8 to 15. Are you with me? Okay, what did we see here? Let's see, day 2. Jonathan was obligated to defend David's life, even if it meant going against his father. Is God responsible then to defend us in our covenant with him today? She talks about Exodus. That's a little side note there. But then she says, read Psalm 105, 8 to 15, and mark every use of covenant. Then note any verse that would indicate God's protection of his people, and write your insight. So we started with an Old Testament verse, and we're going to move then into the New Testament. Psalm 105, let's read that. Does somebody have that open by chance and have it available to read? Okay, would you read 8 to 15 of Psalm 105?
He remembers his covenant forever, the word that he commanded for 1,000 generations, the covenant that he made with Abraham, his sworn promise to Isaac, which he confirmed to Jacob as a statute, to Israel as an everlasting covenant, saying, to you I will give the land of Canaan as your portion for an inheritance. When you were few in number, of little account, and sojourners in it, wandering from nation to nation, from one kingdom to another people, he allowed no one to oppress them. He rebuked kings on their account, saying, touch not my anointed ones, do my prophets no harm.
Okay, so seems to me like as the premise upon what this statement in verse 14 and 15 is made is on the premise that he has made a covenant with Israel, and with these patriarchs through the lineage of them, he continued to reaffirm it, right, reestablish it. He wasn't making a new one, but he was simply confirming it. So when you get to 14 and 15, let's make a list here then of what it says that God has done for these people, Israel. He did not what?
Allow someone to oppress them.
Oh, okay, he did not permit any man to oppress. Okay, and that's in verse 14. What else? He reproved kings for their sake. Okay. What else? Yeah, he did not let anyone touch his anointed ones, nor what? Nor his prophets. He did not allow or did not let anyone. Now, I think we have to kind of parse this out a little bit more carefully, though. Think of Jeremiah. What happened in the life of Jeremiah? Did his prophet get touched? Oh, yeah. Think of Ezekiel and Daniel, who were actually faithful. What was going on? What happened with both of them? Did the enemies oppress them? Did they get taken into their captivity? Yes. So what does he mean then? So what you can say is, number one, is this a truth statement? The answer is? Just say yes with me. Yes, this is a truth statement. So whatever God is saying here, whatever he means here, he's saying, I did not permit any man to oppress them. He reproved kings for the sake of Israel. Now that one's pretty easy for us to get a good understanding of right away. And he did not let anyone touch his anointed ones. Wait a minute. Nor his prophets. Yes, he did. What does it actually mean? So if we know that what he's saying is an absolute fact and truth, so we have to now analyze this and say, in what ways does he mean this? What does he mean they were not oppressed? Oppressed so far as to do what? What was the outcome of the oppressions that they did? They did go into Egypt, went under oppression for 400 years. But what did not happen? Go ahead.
To death.
It was not to death. It was not to destroy. There was oppression. Now think of this in our lives too, you guys, because this is going to really affect you and I. Do we, and listen, all we have to do is listen to our prayer requests in the morning. Do we have struggles in our lives? Is there oppression sometimes against us that it isn't even of our own doing? Are there hard things that we have to endure that are aches of just living life in this world that we live in? Yes. But does he not permit any man to oppress us so as to destroy us? Right? And the answer is no, he won't. He did allow Israel to have some oppression, and he certainly himself judged them and took them into their Babylonian captivity, and others, Assyria, Babylon, then the Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome, it went on and on, right? What about did not touch his anointed ones? Well, sometimes they were touched. Daniel was touched, but what happened? Joseph was touched, but then what? What about, Jeremiah was touched, but then what? He died. And that's a good thing, right? Good, Susan. Bring the joy down. I shouldn't have picked Jeremiah. No, he did die. But it was not because of God's the oppression that God was putting on him. He allowed him to endure. Actually, a couple of times he was brought out of that pit and restored, and he got to go back and do things before he finally dies, because his opponents did not put him to death. He died after the fact. So what we see here then is it's do not let anyone touch his anointed ones nor his prophets any harm, meaning no permanent harm. And for sure, God always protects a remnant for his own witness. How many times does he say, and there was a remnant here and there was a remnant there? God never allowed Israel or his prophets or his mighty ones or his anointed ones. Even King Saul was protected until he wasn't, right? It was never damage or harm so that God's holy name would not be exalted in the end. God was never break his covenant promises to Israel. So his covenants were always maintained. There was always a remnant. If you think about Esau and Jacob, the firstborn was Esau. But who got to inherit the kingdom or the lineage? Jacob. Why? Because Esau did evil. And Esau rejected his own birthright. And so God, even before they were born, God knew this, sovereign God, and he said, Jacob, the older shall serve the younger. And so we see God always making sure that there is a remnant. So when he says he did not permit any man to oppress him, it's to oppress to the point of destroying them. He did not let anyone touch them, as in it was not a permanent harm. Often there is trials and tribulations, but they're a temporary thing for a purpose.
This kind of relates, but it kind of reminds me in the New Testament where God says that he'll allow testing for us, but he'll allow
James, yeah. Isn't it James chapter? Yes, exactly. Did you get to do homework? Good, because I don't remember if we went to James though, did we? No, we did. Oh, good. What day are we on now? Are we on day 3? We're ready for day 3, I think. We did do Acts. We should do Acts first before we move in there, because Acts 9 was really good, and it followed on to this. So we did Psalms 105, and then we did Acts 9, and that was about Saul. Saul, right? What was Saul doing? Yeah, he was attacking the church. I can't think this morning. Church. Okay. And so Jesus' response to him was what?
Why are you persecuting me?
Saul, why are you persecuting me? Right? All right, that's in 9:4. Okay? So when you look at this is an interesting thing. So Saul was he touching the anointed ones? Was he after the prophets of that time, those that were alive and spreading? Yeah. So what did God do? He did?
Well, he said something to him. He appeared to him.
Yeah, it appeared to him.
He said, "What are
And
you
then did
doing?"
what? And did what to his heart? Made him a friend of the church instead of an enemy. Isn't that interesting? So was there persecution? Were the anointed ones touched, but not to destroy? Instead, God used that scenario, and he took the man who was persecuting, turned his heart, and made him a friend to the church, made him a friend to God. And now he's doing the opposite. Now he's willing to die for his faith and belief on the one that he was persecuting. But what do we learn about covenant here?
In this particular one, if you're persecuting a covenant partner, you're persecuting them.
Yeah.
You're doing to one, you're doing it to all, so to speak.
If you persecute a Christian, you are persecuting Jesus. That's what that's teaching us right there. If you are persecuting a Christian, you are persecuting Jesus. How does that change your perspective about people that come against you because of your faith? Any thoughts?
You have the fear of the Lord, what could happen to that person who's actually coming against the Lord that
Okay. You say that again.
have the fear of the Lord concerning that person.
For their behalf. Yes, it would put the fear of God in my heart for them on their behalf, because if they're persecuting me, they're actually coming against God. If I'm in the right, now if it's just persecution, then you get what you get. But if you're unjustly being persecuted simply because of your faith in Christ, and someone comes against you, is it Psalm 70 that says, I envied the wicked until I entered into the sanctuary of God? Then I saw their final demise. So when you think about the idea that a person might be persecuting you, as Saul was persecuting the early church here, Paul didn't know it at that time. Saul did not know it at that time. But he perceived, Jesus saw Saul's attack as him attacking him. Because why? To become one. If you're one with Christ, then he feels your pain. He recognizes the assault is toward him. Later we go on to read these other things about how he says, if they hated me, they're going to hate you also, right? Okay, so that is the point we see here. He's not going to permit anyone to oppress them to their demise, and he's going to not allow them to be touched to their destruction, because when anyone attacks you, they're actually going against God himself, because you're in covenant with God. Okay, day 3. Okay, I think we're going to be okay. We'll see. Day 3. Let me find my day 3. We are looking at Thessalonians 1. Yeah, I got to figure out what page am I on here. Day 3, here we go. Okay, page 29. So what is God going to do to a Christian's enemies? So we looked at 2 Thessalonians 1, 3 to 10. We looked at Romans 12. We looked at Matthew 5. I think that was all of them right there. So tell me, what did we learn as we looked here about Saul? Saul, why are you persecuting me? What's going on here? What will God do for you and I? That's the cool thing. Well, let's just start in 2 Thessalonians.
So God will repay with affliction those who afflict.
There you go. God will repay with affliction those who afflict you. So God is telling us in the New Testament, this is what's really neat about this, is you see the principle, the doctrine about covenant with God in the Old Testament through the storylines. And you have to pick it out little piece and little piece. You draw an analytical conclusion, and what your conclusion is that God will protect you. He's not going to permit someone to destroy you or to crush you. But yet, in the New Testament, he makes a very direct statement. He says, I'm going to afflict those who afflict you, right? He will do that for you. He tells you straight out, I will do that. But the contrast to that is seen in Romans 12. What does it say in Romans 12:19?
Bless those who persecute you.
Yeah.
Don't take your revenge.
But as for you,
Don't take your revenge because you have to leave room for the wrath of God.
yeah, never take your own revenge. So what you have to do is leave it up to God. When people persecute you, you're not to lash back at them. It's not to say that you can't protect yourself and walk away. It doesn't mean that you can't shut down communications and those kinds of things. But you cannot do evil to them as they have been doing to you. You cannot respond in an earthly manner, in a fleshly manner, in a worldly manner, as the world would. Oh, well, if he hit me, I'll just hit him back twice as hard. Well, you can't do that. As a Christian, you're not allowed to do that. That's what we saw here in Romans 12. In 2 Thessalonians, what else did we say that he would do for us?
Give relief.
Yeah, he said the Lord's faithful. He's going to do what? What verse are you in?
7.
He will give relief to you who are afflicted, and to us as well, when the Lord will be revealed from heaven. So when is the relief actually coming? When the Lord, the real relief. So what do you know then about life in this world? There's always going to be affliction, but your relief will come one day. I like this idea. It talks about the idea of retribution, the avenging of God, when God will avenge us. That was a very strong message that we picked up on Revelation. Do you guys remember who did Revelation? The souls under the altar. When, O Lord? How long, O Lord, until you avenge our blood? And the closing of Revelation, he is now avenged. And so God will do it, but he'll do it in his timing. Sometimes God will intervene in your momentary things. But sometimes he lets you linger in it for a while. And as you brought up about James really covers that very thoroughly, that those kinds of persecutions and hardships and trials are really for our good. They do a couple of different things, and without actually going there, what do you know trials and tribulations can do for you and I if we will endure in them properly? They make you stronger. Yes, yes.
And then there's a scripture about that it produces hope.
Yes, endurance and strength, and yes, exactly. Okay, so in a way, I almost don't want to put this one up here, but yeah, he will give you relief, yeah, but not for a while. He will give you relief, okay, he will give relief, but he will. He will give relief. Okay, what else do we know? Let's go to 2 Thessalonians 3. Was that one of the ones we looked at?
Chapter 3? No.
Okay, somebody open your Bible. I want you to go. That's my special verse. Okay, go to 2 Thessalonians 3. And someone else look up 2 Corinthians 4, 8, and 9. I don't think that was in our homework either. No, I just found a couple of verses I thought were helpful. Somebody look at 2 Thessalonians and read for me 3 verses 2 and 3. You got that, Susan?
No, I have
Yeah.
the 2 Corinthians.
Oh, good. You got Corinthians? You got Thessalonians?
And that we may be delivered from wicked and evil men, for not all have faith. But the Lord is faithful. He will establish you and guard you against the evil one.
Wow. I love that. My translation said, the Lord's faithful. He will strengthen and protect you from the evil one. I love that. And I always thought about also in John chapter 17 when Jesus' prayer, that God would protect them from the evil one. So God will protect us. He will strengthen and protect you from the evil one. Okay, then 2 Corinthians 4, 8, and 9.
We are afflicted in every way, but
Wow. Actually, that one goes really well with this one, doesn't it? I think I'm going to put this up here. This is 2 Corinthians. I just saw that the connection there. 4, 8, and 9, the teacher is being taught. Okay, so,
Verse 7 in 2 Thessalonians says give relief at the end.
yeah.
These two verses, it's like this is relief here and now.
Yes, that's exactly what I saw. And it's not always totally relief immediately, because he does say you're pressed, but you're not crushed. So he does allow the pressing. You're perplexed, but not despaired. So sometimes you look at the world going, I don't get it, and you're frustrated by it, but you're not going to be in despair about it, because guess what? You've got the hope of glory. What does it say? Read.
It says, if my problems have brought me to prayer, then they have served their purpose.
There you go. You've done us really good, Donna. Donna's the star today. Perplexed and not despaired. You are persecuted, but you're not abandoned. So you can understand that even in your persecution, God is not abandoning you. And he's telling us this clearly right here in 2 Corinthians. In the new covenant, in Jesus Christ, he is your protector. He will not allow you to be crushed. He will not abandon you. You could be, it's possible to be struck down, but not destroyed. You're not going to be destroyed. I thought of neither height nor depth nor principalities nor powers, right? There's nothing that can separate us from the love of God. He is the sovereign one. He holds you in the palm of his hand, and nothing can touch the anointed one that God does not allow. That's important to keeping the concept. There's a balance to this idea. He's my protector. Yeah, but you could go through some difficult things. And guess what? We all do. And it's absolutely an essential for our spiritual growth. Because if you don't go through hard times, you know when you call out to God the most? When you're in hard times. You don't do it when you're happy and things are great. You tend to get really lazy in your faith walk with God. But when your life is really tough, that's when, because you don't have the answers. You don't know what the right thing to do is. You don't know how to solve the problem. Maybe it's not even in your control to solve it. But what God does in those times when your life is tough is he toughens you up.
So here's the other thing I really like in verse 7, before those verses I read. We have this treasure in earthen vessels, that the surpassing greatness of the power may be of God and not of ourselves. He allows us to be oppressed, pressured.
Yes.
So what comes out is of God.
There you go.
It's not our strength.
Which is what we're going to get to, I think, when we move to, I got to have more than 10 minutes. I want more than 10 minutes, but I could do it.
That's the third time.
I was, okay. All right, let's get on. Let's move on. Okay, here, so pressed, not crushed. I'm going to try to go through this. Perplexed, not despaired. Persecuted, not abandoned. Struck down, not destroyed. And this is 2 Corinthians 4, 8, and 9. And that was not in your homework. That's an extra one I added in. I do that sometimes. But it's helpful to me sometimes if I can make it more crystallized in my thinking, to make it relate to what we're looking at here. If we're looking at the idea that God is going to protect us and that that's part of the covenant thing, is he's promised he will protect us, how does he go about doing that? Well, it doesn't feel sometimes like he's protecting. Sometimes it feels like we're being abandoned, but he's saying, no, you're not abandoned. You might be persecuted, but you're not abandoned. And you might be struck down, but you're not going to be destroyed. God has got you. Remember Job. There you go. Okay. So, therefore, he says, for you and I, then the result is, what are you and I not to do? Never repay evil for evil. And that was in Romans 12, 17. But he does tell us to do what? To be like the Father. Do you remember, what did it say in Matthew 5:48? As your Father is perfect, right? And that's in Matthew 5:16. No, 5:48.
Back to Romans 12, verse 18, though, it also tells us to be at peace with all men.
Yes, be at
Because
peace.
there's definitely a difference between not repaying evil
Yeah.
for evil and being at peace.
Be at peace
There's a difference in that.
with all men. As far as it is dependent on you, is what it goes on to say. Be at peace with all men. And that, give me the reference again. Romans 12:18. Okay, that's a good one. Okay, so this is going to keep us in a healthy balance here. Then in day 4's homework, then, what are we called to do then? In John 13, we looked at a lot. John 13, we looked at John 15. This is the one I was thinking of. He says, the world's going to hate you because it hated me, right? But are we supposed to respond as the world responds? No. What are we supposed to do? Not repay evil, to be perfect as the Father is perfect, to be patient, right? And therefore to do what in John 13? Well, look at verse 15, 13:15.
For I gave you an example that you should also do as I did.
So what did Jesus do?
Wash their feet.
He washed their feet. And later he goes to the cross. And what does he say upon the cross to those who have crucified him? Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. So in his human flesh, as the sacrifice for sin, he was willing to forgive them even as they were persecuting him. No, far more than persecuting, as they were torturing and abusing and murdering him. So as he went to the cross and they put him upon that cross, he said, I gave an example for you that you should do as I do also. By this all men will what? Then in verse 35, what will men do? They will know that you are my disciples if you what? If you have love for one another. So on the one hand, God's going to protect you, but it's in his time. You have to wait on the Lord. He may allow certain things to happen for a period of time. It's all for your good. You have to have that perspective in your thinking. But know this, he won't allow you to be crushed. He won't allow you to be put down. You will never be put to death in a way that crushes your spiritual connection to God. He is always going to keep you in that relationship with him. That cannot be thwarted. Okay, the last one then is the belt. Day 3, that was day 4, kind of day 4. I didn't have room to put it. It's on the chart. You'll get it later. Okay, the last one is the picture. We went back to 1 Samuel 18, 1-5, and he talked about the belt, right? And he said, he gave him his belt. He gave David his belt. And let's talk about what that meant then. What did that signify? What did the belt actually do?
Did it hold all the
Held everything up.
Yeah, it held all his weapons. And I'm going to put it on here, of strength. The things that gave him the strength to be able to do the job he was going to do in war were worn around his belts. You can't go anywhere without your belt. You had to have your belt. So putting on the belt then, what did that mean?
He would be supplied with what he needed to fight the battle, but just like we
Yeah. You would be supplied to be able to do that. So you are actually putting on, it's a symbolic gesture, right? Here's my belt. My belt holds everything I need for my strength in war, for me to have the power to do the job that I can do, right? Or that I need to do. And I'm going to give you my belt, and you're going to put on my belt, signifying you are putting on my what? My strength. Yeah. Putting on the belt is putting on the strength of your partner. It's just a symbolic picture. It's just like sheep are symbolic, the door is symbolic, all these things. So this is the ultimate picture of what putting on that belt was about, why he gave him the belt. So then we went into Isaiah 40:31, one verse there. What did we see? Yeah, this was interesting. Those who wait on him, those who put their hope in God are not disappointed. So put your hope in God. So I did a word study on this. I'm just going to read this real quick. This idea of put their hope in God, it's hope, expect, look eagerly for. That's kind of a different idea, though. It's not hope as in, oh, I'm hoping for something or I'm counting on it. No, it's a expectation. And then he goes on to say in the Greek English lexicon, it says, to look forward with confidence to that which is good and beneficial, to hope for. So my hope is in God. I'm not hoping in me. I'm not hoping in he's going to handle what I'm asking him to handle. My hope is purely in God himself. The character of God, the plan of God, the decrees of God, the will of God for my personal life, whether it be life or death. Remember what Paul said? He'd absent from the body, present with the Lord, and he talked about being better to be with the Lord than to be here, but whatever God's will was, he was willing to do. If it's better for me to stay, then I'll stay for your benefit. So in the idea of waiting on the Lord, the waiting on him is not just sitting down and waiting and listening and being quiet. It's the idea of an active participation of saying, God's got this, I trust him, I don't know how this is going to work out, but I'm going to move forward to the best of my capacity of knowledge and understanding about God and his ways, what's right, what's good, not repaying evil for evil, right? Making sure that I myself am going to be perfect or walking in holiness because my Father is that, and I'm to be at peace with all men as far as I'm capable of doing, and then the rest of it I am going to hope in God on. I'm trusting that God's got this. So he says about them, put their hope in God. And what does that mean? What does he tell them will happen? They will gain new strength. Now that's interesting. Why is it new?
You didn't know it before?
Yep. And this is a power, well, it seems rather obvious that that's the answer, but yet, if you really ponder on that, it's something you didn't have before. So whose strength is this? It's God's strength. God is going to give you something unique and outside of yourself. It's going to be the strength of the Lord that's going to come for your benefit. Why? Because he's your protector, he's your provider. He is going to do this on your behalf. And he goes on to say, and you will run and not get tired. That means to be weary or to faint. So what is he going to give you? Endurance, right? He says you'll walk and not grow weary. That being weary is as to faint. It's kind of like this list we did here. Pressed but not crushed, perplexed but not despair. He says you're going to wear yourself out with this running, but you're not going to get tired. Why? You're going to have this ability, this endurance is going to come upon you to endure in it. And you will mount up with wings like eagles. Now, what does that make you think of? What is God giving you in your... Yeah, you go above this, and to see the victory before the victory's here. You mount up with this victorious attitude of God's got this, I'm his, I can count on him, I don't know how it's going to work out, and it may not work out exactly as I would like. There's been times when I'm saying, God get him, but God didn't get him, right? But yet, there's victory, right? Yes, yes. Right. Yes. All of those things in that putting on the armor of God in Ephesians 6 is all about the Word of God, putting on God himself and his Word. Absolutely. So we'll gain new strength. So it's going to be the strength of God. You will have endurance. not tire. You will have victory as eagles. Mount up. And that's a real shortened version of all that I did a bunch of study on that. Okay, the principles then in the new covenant. I'm wrapping this up. Aren't you happy? Yes. The principles then here is we looked in 1 Corinthians 1 and 2 Corinthians 12. Did we do Philippians 4 also in day 5? Philippians 4:13. So what does it say in Philippians 4:13? Okay. In Philippians 4:13, doesn't that make sense with what's said here? Oh, good. Yes. No, we don't have time. Oh, go ahead.
Just because I thought I just got it really interesting. So it's number 1743. It means to empower. And it's this, I'm not even going to say the Greek word. But it says, it's the idea of putting power in like gas in a car, and thus makes you stronger, vigorous. It can be physical, but more often it refers to spiritual or moral strengthening. It causes one to function. And you can actually, there was a commentary that said that this word strengthen can actually be translated correctly as is I can do all things through him who infuses strength into me.
Wow, I love that. That's beautiful. Nice. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it. I'm just going to mention one more verse here then to wrap us up, and that is in John 15:7. Because he says in that one, and it's very much what was said about the putting on the armor of God. What does it say in John 15:7? Can we find it?
If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you.
Doesn't that seem like a companion to what she just said about the putting on the armor of God? And all those parts of the armor of God all pertain to us putting on the Word of God and God Himself, right? Well, here he says, if you abide in me and my word abides in you, you can ask whatever you wish and it will be done for you. There's a lot more behind that teaching, but the concept there is this, that if you're in alignment with God's will and you're not taking your own revenge, but you're not repaying evil for evil, you're living as a perfect, the biggest thing here is one of the things we don't want to do is defame God's holy name. I thought about when we were in Ezekiel. Remember in Ezekiel it says about he's going to come back, and what is he coming back to do at the end of the age? What is that whole tribulation about? Vindicating his holy name. Why? What had Israel done? They profaned his holy name. You and I do not want to step into there. We do not want to profane God's holy name. He's saying, I will repay, wait on me. It may be the end of the age, but I want you to understand, I will not allow you to be crushed, but there could be persecution in your life, but you cannot do anything in response to persecution if it's going to defame my holy name. You are wearing what? The identity of Christ by putting on the robe and all the weapons. And he's saying, you represent me in the world. You cannot defame my holy name. You cannot blaspheme my holy name. You must walk as your heavenly Father is. You're to be holy as he is holy. In this one it was, you're to be perfect as your Father is perfect. So you and I don't have the right to live as the world or respond as the world. We're to understand that there's going to be bad things that come upon us, but God is your strength. And he's in covenant with you, and you can absolutely 100% guarantee you will have the victory in this. He says, all who are baptized into Christ have clothed themselves with Christ. Galatians 3:27. My closing verse to you is this one in Galatians 2:20. It's a call for all of us, I think. I have been crucified with Christ, and it is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. That's how we're to live. We're to live to please him. All right, week 3 done. Good job. Nice. See you all next week.